All right, so in this video, I'm going to be just talking about how we tune our instruments, some different safety things to keep in mind, and just hopefully give you enough background information so that when we try to tackle this on our own, we feel more comfortable and we feel like we have all the information that we need. So tuning our instruments, it's something that all string players have to learn how to do eventually. You guys are just kind of getting a little bit of a head start. We usually don't start having students tune their own instruments until late 7th grade, early 8th grade. But the current situation kind of necessitates that you guys have to learn how to tune your instruments now, which is going to be great. Once you get into middle school, you guys will be pros at this. So just some quick information that will help us tune our instruments. These are all of the different names of the strings, the different pitches that the strings will be tuned to. So for violin, from low, meaning the biggest string, the lowest string, the lowest string is G, then it goes D, then it's A, and then it's E. And then viola and cello have the same strings, so C, G, D, and A. And then bass has E, A, D, and G. It's actually just the reverse of violin strings. So you don't have to memorize all those right now. To start off with, we'll probably just start tuning our Ds. So we'll get really comfortable tuning our D, and then in our book, we'll start out just reading open D and learning how to play some different notes just on our open D. And then later on, we'll add in the rest of the strings. So we'll learn how to tune all of them eventually. Once we learn one, the other ones are pretty similar. The higher the string is, the more likely the string is to break, just because those strings are thinner. So we'll probably wait to tune our E's, especially for violin, later. And then for viola and cello, A strings aren't quite as likely as E's to break, but they're still more likely than our lower strings. So we'll kind of ease into that. We'll start off tuning our D string. Let's go to the next slide. So some different tuning apps that we can use. In class, we will use an app called Tuner Ninja, and it's just a website. You can just search Tuner Ninja in Google and it'll pop up. It's free. It works really well. So I'll be using that in class for us. I'll share my screen and have Tuner Ninja up and just kind of go around the class and have people try tuning their instruments in class. We'll do that a little bit later in the week. But if you wanted to get an app to use on like your phone, I use ClearTune on my phone. It's a really nice app, but there's so many different tuning apps out there. You can use pretty much anything you want. And any tuner will work. It doesn't have to be specific to strings. And I've had people ask me, I have a guitar tuner, will that work? Or I have, this tuner that my brother used on his trumpet, will that work? Yes, any tuner works, as long as it will pick up the sound and will be able to tell you what pitch you're playing. Any tuner will work. If it's specific to strings, it might be a little bit more technically correct, but it's not super important at this point that we're perfectly in tune. We just want to get as close as we can. All right, and finally, some things to keep in mind as we're learning how to tune. Strings do break easily. I've been playing string instruments since I was in the 4th grade, and I still sometimes accidentally break strings just by turning the pegs a little bit too far. So that probably is going to happen at some point, and it's okay. But we need to be as super careful as we possibly can. The smaller the adjustment, the better, especially when it comes to our tuning pegs. So our tuning pegs are the ones up at the very top of our instrument, and they make really big adjustments. So if you turn them just a little bit too far, that string gets a little bit too tight, it can snap really easily. And like I said, that's more likely on our higher strings, but low strings can snap as well. So we just need to make sure that we're being super careful when we're using the tuning pegs. And there's some ways that we can try and keep our instruments from going very far out of tune. So our string instruments are really susceptible to environmental changes. So if you keep them in a room that's too cold, they're likely to get out of tune, or if you keep them in a room that's too hot. If they're too cold, then the strings will likely be sharp, and then if they're too hot, then the strings will likely be flat. We'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. So if we keep our instruments in, a nice medium temperature room, that'll help them from going out of tune. Also making sure that we don't hit them on stuff. So if we hit the scroll or the pegs on stuff, that can jar the strings out of tune really quickly. So we need to be really careful, making sure we're taking good care of our instruments and being super careful with them. And that means, you know, not letting other people touch your instruments. So your instruments have been rented out to you from the district, or, you know, your personal instrument is just for you to play. So make sure that even though it might be kind of fun to show younger siblings, you know, what we're doing in class and try and teach them, let's just hold off on that for a while until we're more comfortable with our instruments. Because it can really affect the intonation of the instrument. Bridges can pop off, strings can pop off. So we just want to be as super careful as we possibly can with our instruments. And then always use the fine tuners before the pegs. So the fine tuners are the little tuners down at the very bottom of our instrument. So these little ones down here. So we always want to make sure that if we're making small adjustments that we're using the fine tuners. And, you know, for the most part, you should be good just using the fine tuners. You shouldn't have super big adjustments to make, especially if you're taking good care of the instrument. You don't want to use the tuning pegs for big adjustments. These are for little adjustments. These are only for big adjustments. So always try to use the fine tuners before the tuning pegs. That'll help you. It'll help you not break the strings as often. And if a string does break, it's probably going to happen at some point if you keep on playing strings. It's not a big deal. We just replace the string. So if you're renting a district instrument, then let me know, and I can help you figure that out. If you're using your own personal instrument, any of our local music stores will carry strings, and you can just take them in there, and they can even replace the string for you. So it's not a big deal if you break a string, especially right now since we're not using all of the strings yet. If one breaks, you'll probably still be able to participate in everything we're doing in class, but you know, just try and get it fixed as soon as you can. All right, so now I'm just going to kind of give you a demo of how to tune a bass. I'll talk over a little bit of the differences because bass is a little bit different from the rest of the string instruments, and I'll just kind of give you a demo of two of our different strings. So first I want to talk about a little bit about the difference between sharp and flat. So sharp and flat are terms that we use to describe how in tune our strings are. So if you were tuning your D, for instance, and the tuner was telling you that you were playing an E flat. So an E flat is a half step above D, which would mean that your string was too tight or sharp. So if your string is playing a pitch that's higher than the note that you're wanting, that means that your string is sharp. So you need to loosen the string. Now if your string was, if you were tuning your D and it was telling you were playing a C sharp, that's a half step below your D. So that would mean that your string was flat. So if your string is playing too low, it means it's flat. If it's playing too high, that means it's sharp. So with bass, if you're trying to loosen your string, then you want to turn it to the right, which is kind of counterintuitive. You would think righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, but if you want to loosen your string, you turn it down to the right. And so I just way untuned my D. If you want to tighten it, then you turn it to the left. So lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. So it's opposite for a lot of other things. So let me get my D back in tune really fast. There we go. So if you need to loosen your string, turn it to the right, and if you want to tighten your string, turn it to the left. And you'll get used to that the more you're tuning your instrument. It'll become second nature to you, but for a little while it might seem kind of weird to turn it to the left to tighten it. Lefty-loosey, yeah. I even still have to think through it sometimes. So the two strings I'm going to cover with us today are our D, so our second highest string, and our G, so our highest string. And I have very much untuned my G because I want to just kind of give you a demo of what it looks like if your string is really untuned. So the tuner I'm going to use today is called Cleartune. I know it's hard to see on the screen, but there's a little gauge right in this part that shows you what pitch you're playing, and then there's an arrow up here that turns green when you're playing the right pitch. and there's a dial that kind of shows you whether you're playing sharp or flat. So I'll start with my D, and I just tuned it, so it is pretty close in tune, but it's actually telling me I over-tuned a little bit, so I'm a little bit sharp. So if I'm sharp, that means my string is too tight, so I need to loosen it a little bit. So I'll turn it to the right. Just a little bit. There we go. Super small adjustments. Most of the time, especially with bass, basses tend to stay in tune better than other instruments because we have these gears here. So these gears allow us to make small adjustments with just these tuning machines. We don't have to deal with fine tuners down at the bottom of our instrument. This is the only place to tune our instrument, is right here. So that helps the strings from going out of tune as often. But temperature still can affect the strings. So if the bass is kept in a place that's too cold, the strings will get sharp. And if it's kept in a place that's too hot, the strings will get flat. So then I'll go over to my G. So I untuned my G a lot. So right now it's telling me that I'm actually playing it in F. So that's a whole step below what I need to have this string tuned to. So I'm going to need to make a bigger adjustment than I did with my D. So I'll go to my G tuning machine here and make sure that I have the right one. And I do. It's this highest one right here. And even though it's kind of a big adjustment, I'm not just going to crank it. I'm still going to make little adjustments and be constantly checking by pulling the string. Make sure that I'm, one, moving in the right direction, turning the machine in the right direction, and then also that I'm not overstretching the string too quickly. Because if we overstretch them really quickly, that's when they snap. I've never personally had a bass string snap on me, and I hope that I never do because these things are huge. And it would be really loud if one snapped. So we want to make sure we're making really small adjustments, really, slow about it. We don't want to move too fast with tuning. So I'm just making really small adjustments. I'm almost at an F sharp now. So if you look at my left hand, it's hardly moving at all. I am turning it, but very, very slowly. And I can see that the pitch is moving up, so I'm watching the gauge on my tuner. So I know I'm moving in the right direction. So I just hit an F sharp. Just a half step more to go. Just reached the G. So really small adjustments. You can be very slow and meticulous with this. The slower we do it, the more likely we'll be accurate. If you turn it too fast, you might miss the pitch and then you'll have to loosen the string again. And so just the more that we're gentle with the strings, the better in shape they'll stay. So they won't break as often or need to be replaced as often. So that's all I had for you on tuning the bass. If you have any questions, please let me know. You can let me know in class, or you can shoot me an email or something. We'll be doing a lot of practice on this in class, so hopefully we'll get really comfortable with this pretty quickly, and then before you know it, tuning will just kind of be second nature to you. So I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you back in class.